right, we're ready to go. We're good. We're live.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Corey McCarthy. I am the vice principal at Everett High School, state of Massachusetts. We are excited to bring you an awesome event with a young gentleman, right? Who is who who we probably are super fortunate to have for taking his time to really put us in our good space with his work. A gentleman who has written over 60 children's books. Born in North Carolina, spent his years in New Jersey, attended filmmaking and photography classes, which really influenced his style. Obtained a bachelor's in fine arts from Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, and Pratt is not an easy school to get into, where his mentor was the illustrator Jerry Pickney. You can actually look at Jerry Pickney because I'm all in Mr. Ransome's business. James Ransome has illustrated over 60 picture books and has illustrated greeting cards, magazines, commissioned murals, including 3 National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. So without further ado, shout out to Ms. Gill, EHS staff on here, EHS students on here, EPS students on here. We bring you Mr. James Ransome.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I want to say one thing before I forget. My mother-in-law graduated from Everett High School back in 1943. And yesterday was her birthday, and she turned 96 years old. So, kudos to you guys. So my wife is from Malden, so Everett's right next door. So I've heard a lot about you. I've been there plenty of times. So it's really an honor to be here to share my work with you all. So I'm going to now share my screen and get going because we have a lot to cover, and I have a lot to share with you, of course. So we're going to get started right away with where I'm from. I'm from North Carolina, a small little town called Rich Square. This is downtown Rich Square. We're talking 2 traffic lights, everyone. So this is a place where everyone knew everyone, and those 2 traffic lights are about a block away from each other. This is me as a youngster, probably preschool there. And this is also from North Carolina, is a wonderful writer by the name of Sheila Moses. And one day we're going to do a book together. We keep talking about doing something, but one day we're going to do a book together. And we're so proud to have from this small little town an illustrator and a writer. And this is a great book about the legend of Buddy Bush. It's actually a true story. It took place in Rich Square. So I was actually born in front of this office, this building this car is parked in front of, this doctor's office. And growing up in this small town, there were not a lot of opportunities for someone like myself who knew they wanted to be an artist since the 3rd grade. You guys are so fortunate to have an art program, from elementary school up to high school. There was nothing available for me. There wasn't anyone with a cart going from room to room. There was no artist to bring me to his or her studio. And of course, there were no museums or galleries to go into to see artwork. So my first art teachers came from this pharmacy here, and they were comic books. So I started, like so many kids who live in rural areas, reading and copying the images in comic books. The Master of Kung Fu was my absolute favorite. And it was something about these pictures that I found very special. The way this artist told stories, where he would sometimes use animals that weren't even written into the text and made them part of the stories. The way he used shadows and in the darkness, it was just drawn a little different also. So I really, I started copying these and making up my own comic books about my friends and I doing different things. Then I was introduced to Mad Magazine. And I just love these drawings by all these amazing cartoonists in Mad Magazine. And I started copying those as well. And all these sort of add up to me making books about my friends and I doing crazy things as kids. And I would pass those books around the classroom. So I was that creative kid who sort of found ways and sought out books and things on TV shows about art, and anything from my elementary school library about drawing, I would check out and read it and copy it and just try to teach myself as much as I could. Then I got lucky. I moved away from North Carolina. I moved to New Jersey. I moved to Bergenfield, New Jersey, which is a suburb of New York City. It's right across the George Washington Bridge. So we're literally 10 minutes from New York City. And this is me in high school. And this high school had not only one art teacher, we had an entire wing dedicated to the arts, and we had about 8 art teachers. And almost anything you can imagine was taught in this program. It was very much like a foundation program. For the first year, you experiment with different things. In the second year, you can take classes in photography, filmmaking, drawing, painting, metalsmithing, ceramics. I mean, you almost named it. And at a certain point, once you work with a professor, maybe 2 or 3 times, you could then take independent study with different people and take even higher level classes like art history and even drawing from the model. So this was an amazing program. And my high school art teacher, Charlie Bogasat, I went to his retirement party a few years ago. He's the person responsible for me going to college and having this career that I have. So I always keep him in my presentation. I always talk about Mr. Charlie Bogasat. So I went off to Pratt Institute to major in illustration. And at Pratt, my foundation year, I learned 3 basic things about art that made things that would make art interesting. And these has been part of my practice ever since. The importance of drawing, design or composition, and the importance of color. And these are things I sort of apply to each piece that I work on, and even in how I judge artwork. Then there in the art history classes, I became aware of Degas. And these are some of my favorite artists that influenced me at that time. Mary Cassatt, John Singer Sargent, Van Gogh. And this is one of my first drawings I did. This is a lifetime drawing using a ballpoint pen, which was a freshman year assignment. And I continue to draw, and I love these sort of value drawings, using pencils or pens, and just working out values and working out these strong compositions. I did this painting my second year in school, and this is what I became interested in doing when I was in school. I wanted to do sports figures. So I started painting sports figures, and this is what I wanted to do once I graduated. I wanted to work for Sports Illustrated. I wanted to travel the world, covering sporting events and painting paintings about athletes doing different sporting events. So for my senior year project, I went back to my high school, and I did a series of paintings about the high school football team practicing. So I took pictures of the team. And I went back to my Pratt studio and started working on these paintings. These are 3 of the paintings. If you look close, you can see how I'm paying strong attention to composition. This is a limited palette, and also so that covers color. And of course, the drawing is there, but it's also sort of a flat design that I'm also interested in. I did this piece also in my last year, and this piece became quite popular. First, it was in a contest at the Society of Illustrators, which we're going to talk about later. Which is a great institution for students who are interested in illustration. And my piece won a scholarship there. They have a college competition every year, and my piece was won this year and using the cover of the catalog, and I got a little award money. It was also used by Citibank. They went to all the 3 major art schools in New York City, and they chose existing artwork to create a calendar that they give out to their customers to promote the fact that they gave out student loans. And I had a lot of student loans from Citibank. So I was a perfect person. That's not the reason why they chose my piece though. But this piece being used for the month of June was really exciting for me. And they bought the painting from me. And so, you know, right after graduating, right upon graduating, I sold the painting to Citibank of all people. It was also used it was also over agent's desk, and he did licensing. Licensing is when they take existing artwork and they put it on different products. So after graduating, he became my agent, and it was made into a greeting card. It led to doing these shopping bags, and one of those bags was made into a jigsaw puzzle. So this was really exciting. All this attention I was getting right after graduating. This is me in graduating from college. Had a lot more hair back then. At a Purple Rain party, I met my wife, Lisa. The story goes, I asked her to dance, and we've been dancing ever since. And she is a writer, and these are 3 of her middle grade books that she's written, part of a series. Finding Langston is very popular, and Leaving Lyman came out the year after, which was last year, and Being Clem is the one that's coming out soon. Okay. Also, because of her, we were dating, and she got an internship at a magazine. And the cubicle next to her was another magazine, and they were looking for an illustrator. So I guess I did an internship because I didn't get paid to do drawings for this magazine for teenagers. And so the first work I did was these cartoons like this. So the first year I got paid nothing. The next year they paid me $20, no matter how many illustration jobs they gave me. And the next year they gave me $20 per illustration. I was so excited to get that first $100 check. It was like, whoa, I'm making money from my art. So I did all of these types of things that what I did, mostly black and white drawings. Sometimes they were in paint. This was actually done in '87. So I was actually still in school when this was done. So after graduating, I continued to study. I went to the Art Students League and took classes. I did this probably within weeks of graduating. This is my first full color job that I did for a magazine, for a cover called Biker Report. At the same time, I started going to conferences. I went to a children's book conference, and I went to the Graphic Artists Guild. So I'm going to show you here in these little cutouts how this helped me. So at the children's book conference, I met Diane Dillon, who is married. Well, he passed away a few years ago. Leo Dillon. They were a famous illustrator couple, Leo and Diane Dillon. And she was doing a presentation. And at her presentation, she showed her drawings. I was really impressed that she drew on tracing paper. They drew on tracing paper and designed everything using tracing paper. Then they would transfer that drawing to the board they would paint on. I go, that's what the pros do, tracing paper. So I stored that away. I also just joined the Graphic Artists Guild, and they had a portfolio networking party. This is days before the internet, so I know I'm really dating myself here. But they had a networking party where you would bring your portfolio in and you would share it with other people. And at that party, a guy was getting off the subway, and he just happened to bump into a former classmate who wasn't going to the party and invited him along. And it was that person who saw my work and suggested I send my work to Richard Jackson. So I got a little lucky there that he bumped into his friend and then saw my work and said I should send my work to Richard Jackson. And Richard Jackson, he's going to give me my first book to illustrate. I had also saw the work of Jerry Pinkney's when I was in college, and that encouraged me to do paintings like this, of this little girl who's just doing everyday things. And these are 3 paintings are all based on this Degas painting where he's winning a bathing. The whole idea is for sort of watching this girl who's doing everyday things and she's not aware of us. And that led to me doing my first picture book, which is called Do Like Kyla. This book is 20 years old. and it's still selling. I still receive royalties from it. Actually, that book is 30 years old. I'm sorry. Also, when I was in school, this is Jerry Pinkney's family. And his son, Scott Pinkney, was at Pratt the same time I was at Pratt. And I met him in a class, and he told me about his father. I saw his work in these books called The Annual, produced by the Society of Illustrators, which I'm going to talk to you about later also. And so I was aware of him. I was happy to meet his son. And Jerry came and spoke at the school. And after I graduated and finished my first book, I wrote him and asked him could I come to the studio, and he invited me up. And for the next 10 years, I would go up to Jerry's studio, and he would show me his work. He would critique my work, and then we would talk about the business over lunch. And I learned so much at the foot of this wonderful man. And this is his work, some of his drawings. But he's done probably almost 100 children's books. And he's probably the godfather of African-American children's book illustrators. And he's the person who taught me about the importance of reference books and reference material, among other things. So now I live in New York State, about an hour and a half from New York City, in the Hudson Valley, along the Hudson River, in this house in Rhinebeck, New York. Now, if you come to Rhinebeck, this is my wife, Lisa, and our 4 children. This is our oldest, Jamie, who lives in Syracuse. This is Maya, who is, she's actually in grad school, Jamie. And Maya is a graphic designer in New York City, who's actually riding out the pandemic in Florida right now because she can work remotely. And Malcolm is sort of a freelance artist who's actually helping me on a project that I'll be talking to you about later. And this is our youngest, Layla, who's in college now at Emory in Georgia. If you come to Rhinebeck and you like World War I airplanes, you can actually go see a show, and you can actually take a ride in one of these if you're brave enough. You can stay at the Beekman Inn. Supposedly George Washington stayed there, and it's one of the oldest inns in the country. Also living here is illustrator Peter McCarty, who illustrated Hondo and Fabian. G. Brian Karras, who's illustrated over 100 children's books. Jessica Love, who's new to town, and this is she's only had 3 books to come out. And this is James Gurney, a famous landscape artist who has about a gazillion people following him on his blogs and his Instagram. And he does tutorials on landscapes. And he's written a few books about subjects as well. This is one of his fans. So it's nothing to go into town and to see him painting a cityscape or a landscape. My second mentor is a guy named Robert Cunningham, who lived in this 200-year-old house in Connecticut. And I would go up and see him and show him my work. And this is the type of work that he did. He was also a major influence on me. And mostly I learned how to minimize and not paint everything that I saw in front of me from him. I also took classes with artist and illustrator Bert Silverman. This is his work, his drawings. Charles Reed, I took classes with him, and he helped me learn watercolors, which I work mostly in now. His books are just amazing. And he suggested this other book to me, the Keys of Drawing. And then there's Jack Potter, who's a famous illustrator who artists came to take lessons from. Back in the 70s, his classes were just completely packed with people. He was a famous person who had a certain philosophy about making art, and he's a big influence on me as well. And this is some of the work that I did in his classes, really got to understand the importance of shapes. So let's go through some of those books that I've illustrated. This is my first one, like I told you before. And we have Uncle Jed's Barbershop, Creation. I'm not going to name them all, but these are some of the books that I've done. At this point, I'm getting close to about 80 books. I've been doing this for 30 years and usually illustrating between 2 and 3 books a year, and traveling around the country. Talking about my books is basically how I've made my living as a commissioned artist, illustrator. So I've done all different types of subjects, about animals, people, historical subjects, contemporary subjects, sports. These are the books that I've written and illustrated these for. And this is my newest book, Gridiron. It's a book that I didn't write, but it was my idea. And I found a writer to write the text. I just didn't have time to write it. And this basically takes you to the history of football. We've got 4 quarters, and each one we see a different uniform as we move through the history. And this is 98 pages, 48 illustrations. And after finishing this, I went right into the history of basketball, 75 years of basketball. And that's also 98 pages, but I think it has close to 50 illustrations for it. And it'll be coming out next year. My Story, My Dance, story about Alvin Ailey. This is done in pastels. So I also use different mediums. Sometimes I work in watercolors, sometimes I work in oils, I work in acrylics, I work in pastels, and I have a new medium that I work in as well. This is something I did for the New York City transit system. I put this in all the subway cars. They do this every year. They choose 3 artists to put in subway cars. Posters I've done. Major Taylor, who is from Massachusetts, Worcester, Massachusetts, famous cyclist. This is for Patterson Library. This is a Children's Museum, a thank you to a person who founded it. This is for Indianapolis, a story about storytelling. This is a local library mural I did for them. This is the Underground Railroad Museum in Cincinnati, Ohio. I did 3 murals for them. This there. And that's a large one. And I started doing collages a few years ago. And these collages, these cut paper collages led to me doing a book about the Williams sisters in collage. So it's all cut paper. I sometimes paint my own paper and buy paper. And this was really a lot of fun doing this. But in between doing all that work, I would sometimes find time to paint pictures. And these are the type of pictures I would paint, these landscapes. And this is what I was doing sort of for my personal work, you might say. But I also love going to museums and seeing studio artists and their work. And I was sort of like this person who just galleries and museums were always interesting to me. And so what happened was I saw this piece at a museum. I just was shocking that this wall was actually considered artwork. But I love these colors. I love the pattern. It has so many things that are part of my philosophy. And then I had a show. I used to teach at Syracuse, and I had a show at a gallery there. And that really sort of lit a fire in me and sort of gave me my interest. And I saw this exhibit by this guy by the name of Henry Taylor. And I learned that he was an older person who came into studio arts. And I thought maybe there was still some time for me to pursue this dream that I've always had. So I also went to this retreat. And at this retreat, I met this artist here, Derek. And he talked to me about studio arts and really got me interested. And so I started thinking about going to grad school. And it was a dream that I've had. I wanted to go to study studio arts, but I was too afraid. So I decided to take that leap and live my dream. And I enrolled in a program at Lesley University, their low-res grad program. These are some of the people who are in my classmates. And this was when we met in person. We would have our work up on an exhibit on these walls, and we were critiqued, and we read a lot. Did a lot. For 2 years, I studied studio art. And this is one of the first pieces I did there. And this piece was entered in the Society of Illustrators. Every year they have a competition, an annual competition, and they produce these booklets. And this is the books that I discovered Jerry Pinkney's work in. And in these books, you can actually see the best work that's produced that year by illustrators. Well, I've been in this annual before, but this year my piece was used on the cover of the annual. So this is really an amazing honor to be on the cover of this booklet. Well, what is my studio artwork about? is about my grandmother and her 10 children. And it starts off about my work starts with sharecroppers and moves forward in African American history. And 10 of her, not 9 of her 10 children all migrated from the South. Like so many other people who started migrating north in 1917 up to the 1970s. My North Carolina, most of the people on the East Coast went up north to Pennsylvania, New York, Boston, and other areas went to different locations, and Louisiana and Texas went out to California, Oregon, and Washington State. So my work focuses on the people who went up the East Coast and who moved to cities. And so my work is also about these children who grew up in cities, who were born, or maybe their parents were born someplace else. And it's also about their children. And this is my nephew, and this is his fiance. So it's also about them, but it's also about these people who are moving back down south. And he and his fiance are now living in Charlotte, North Carolina. So it's about, that's one part of what my work is about. It's also about Black culture and Black politics. The supplies I use are simple. They are things that you can find in any elementary art school program: paints, glue, paper. But my concepts are deep. They are layered and very layered. So these are things I said I learned when I was in undergrad, and these were part of my studies, my practice. But now I've added new things to my practice, like concepts, painting language, and something that's hard to really describe. My word for it is soul, that thing that sort of touches you that you can't really describe. So concepts, this sort of general notion, the idea. For example, this is about African American writers, and we see this person inside this sort of box. The idea being that African American writers often feel a need to write about their culture, and they sort of can feel confined by that limitation, that they don't always have they may have this imagination, which we see outside, and can sort of go anywhere, but they feel limited in this obligation to write about their culture. So in some ways they feel shackled. Painting language, this is the things that myself and painters talk about, how close those colors are to each other, the values, the shapes, the edges, the mark making, all those sort of things. And then we have that other part that it's hard to describe, that sort of soul of the painting. Often in African-American literature, there's talks about birds and snakes and things like that. And that's all sort of part of the soul that hopefully it touches with people. But music is a big part of my work. Blues. I've been listening to a radio station recently, and in mornings they play doo-wop, which I can't believe I'm listening to doo-wop on Saturday mornings. And then jazz is a big part. Art Blakey is one of my favorite jazz musicians. Of course, James Brown, but I'm a huge Parliament Funkadelic fan, and the work that Pedro Bell did for Funkadelic album covers were some of my first influences. I remember copying those, and so his artwork is also a big influence on my work. But rap music is also a big part of my influence. But literature, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Zora Hurston, all those writers, contemporary writers. And then there's also the artists that I like, and there's too many that I could fill the museum, but these are the people I would actually walk 5 miles to see. Kerry James Marshall, Henry Taylor, Richard Diebenkorn, Robert Rauschenberg, William H. Johnson, Paul Gauguin, Romare Bearden, and the women of Gee's Bend, who make these beautiful quilts, which I feel are works of art, and I contribute and celebrate their work all the time in my work. And we actually went to Gee's Bend the year before the pandemic, and I got to meet some of those quilters who reminded me of my aunts and uncles in the areas that I grew up in North Carolina. So I felt a real kinship with them. So my work, this is my work. I'm gonna breeze through this really quickly so I can have time to answer questions. But this is, you can always go to my website and see pieces. This is actually named Song of Solomon because it's sort of based on a passage from there. This is a pretty black hair woman. And this is the man who works hard and creates a farm. And that piece was sold to actress CCH Pounder, this duplicate. And she bought it before I really just finished it, probably like 2 weeks before she came by the studio and saw this piece. And her friend Lorraine Toussaint came in and also purchased the piece. This is one of my favorite pieces, which is sort of influenced lightly by this Andrew Wyeth painting. Again, we just don't have time to talk about the details of it. But this is how how folks can fly. Here, I'm not actually showing the people flying, but actually that movement of them flying. So sometimes work is abstract, and this has a sort of a kinship to Matisse's work, quote patterns from the Women of G's Ben. But rap music, I was a DJ back in the late 70s, and that has influenced my collage work. I sort of approach it like a sampler, taking a little bit from here, a little bit from there. So I use paper that's purchased, I make my own paper, and then paper that's sort of found, envelopes coming in, things like that, or I consider found. I have a book out, an artist book called Cornrows, and this is some of my collages that I put in a book, and these are all available on my website. And at the height of the pandemic, I did a collage a day when we were sheltered in place, and these are some of the collages I would do. And I would post these on Instagram. So, Public Enemy is probably the best example of how I'm thinking when I'm working on a collage. Again, it's small little pieces coming from here and there and mixing together to create something new. This is my newest book, which I just posted on my website, The View from Here. And in this book, you see more figurative work of mine. And it's available now. This is what I'm working on in the studio, but I'm going to show you this as we walk through. These are boxes that can be turned and switched around, sort of making some commentary to transgender, but also how people are seen on the outside and how they feel on the inside as well. And that's the end of the PowerPoint portion of our visit. And now I'm going to give you a quick little tour around the studio, and then we're going to answer some questions. I can't believe I did that fast. So this is, it's really a mess. I forgot, I didn't tell you guys, I didn't show a slide. I didn't show a few slides. Oh man, I forgot. Well, anyway, I'm currently working on something for the History Channel. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is doing these features about African Americans who are not known. And he did the Revolutionary War, and I was actually do drawings for a current one about the Civil War. So there's some portions where we're actually filming here in my studio where they're actually watching me paint. And yesterday and today we filmed, and at the end of today, we looked at it and realized it wasn't in focus, so we're gonna have to film again tomorrow. So the studio is sort of a mess because of that, but we'll do the, I'll show you what it looks like at this point. This is where I was just sitting where I paint most of the time there. I usually have my watercolors on this side. Sometimes acrylics are substituted here. And over here is where I keep sort of pencils and things like that are there. Usually jazz is playing in the studio while I'm working. That's usually on that desktop there as a radio station, WBGO. I'll promote them in Newark, New Jersey that I listen to endlessly. Here's part of the basketball book. This is the piece I have to redo. So this came back, and this is due, actually was due the end of this month, which ends tomorrow. So that's gonna be late. I'm not sure when I'm gonna get a chance to work on that. This is what I was working on earlier. So I was actually painting this. Ms. Gill, how can you see, how's it look? Good?
Yeah, if you want to tilt a little bit down more. Yep.
Okay.
Awesome.
So this, we did two, one against a blue wash and one against a white wash. And that's Harriet Tubman on a boat. And so I basically painted these to the camera. and I have to do another one tomorrow. Here are my boxes, so you get a sense of how large they are. And I've been working on those for about 2 years. They will be finished. We're having an exhibit at Mass MoCA, and they will be presented there at Mass MoCA, my boxes. This is, I'm going to turn some lights on in a few minutes. It's probably getting a little dark here. This is, I'm also working on some posters for Arena Stage in DC. And this is one of the posters I'm working on for them. This is my palette. So that's what my palette looks like. Let me go turn some lights on so we can see a little better here. Other paintings for Arena Stage. This is my light box. So all the drawings start here on my light box, and tracing paper, and they're built and created from that, on that light box. This is my book collection here. And referencing.
We're losing you just a little bit.
I look at for research.
Just a little bit.
Books. Say again?
We're losing you just a little bit. You
okay.
just cut out for a second. There we go.
Right. Okay, good. We're back. Well, these are my reference here and children's books that I've collected. This is a picture book that I'm working on, a biography about Toni Morrison. So that's the current book that I'm working on. And this is where I sit and do the business side of everything. And that sort of brings us back over here. You can see where I was working earlier today. Couch, usually for napping. That's what couch, and that's the studio. Okay, so now I have time for questions if there are any.
Excellent. First of all, thank you so much for that presentation. Didn't really feel rushed.
Good.
I feel like we were more like captivated by some of the art, some of the definition, and you brought a lot of new vocabulary for someone like me who's not an artist, and then you familiarized a lot of folks who are on here are artists, and they're familiar with some of the terms you were using as well. So it was educational and beautiful at the same time. There was one, before I get into the questioning, actually I do have a question. There was a piece that you had, or book you had, it was called Under the Quilt of the Night. I'm testing your memory here. I wouldn't remember anything if I wrote 60 books. I don't even know 60 people. So yeah, so tell us about that, because the cover, it was really deep. Even if you want to go back into your presentation, but Under the Quilt of the Night, that's deep.
Yeah. Well, that was a book. The writer and I did a book maybe 10 years before that called Sweet Clara and a Freedom Quilt. And we talked about doing another book. So that was a sequel to that book, which came out 10 years later. And it was basically about sort of slaves going through the Underground Railroad. That's what it's about. And I did try to do that with that cover. I wanted it to be very sort of strong and powerful, because in some ways, sometimes I respond to work that I've done before. Sweet Clara and the Freedom Quilt was sweet. It was probably meant for second graders on up. And it sort of dealt with this girl who makes a quilt. And that's what sort of introduced quilting to me, and G's been quilters to me. She makes a quilt that's really a map and is used to help her and her others escape. So in this book, there are other things we talk about, like how quilts are hung out on lines and how they're used as signals for people to escape. But it was a fun book to do, and Deborah Hopkins and I did that together.
Wow. Yeah, this really stuck out to me. I wrote it down. I might have to purchase that.
Sure.
They're staring at
I'm
them.
gonna send you a copy of the basketball book since you're a big basketball fan.
Hey, there we go. There we go. And if the set messes up again, you could feel free to send them spares to Everett High School. So you mentioned
what's your favorite team?
Anywhere LeBron James. Anywhere LeBron James is.
Oh, okay. Not a Celtics fan.
There's only two basketball players in the world in my mind: Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, which you mentioned. I actually tweeted about Kareem being the greatest player ever.
Wow.
Actually about a half an hour before we started.
Wow.
So yeah, he's just an inspiration.
And that's half the. I mean, they called me and I was so busy, but they said Kareem was part of the project. I was like, oh, Kareem, come on! I grew up with Kareem. I can't say no to Kareem.
Are you kidding me? Power High School.
I'm hoping this Corona thing ends so I can meet him.
Let me know. I'll hold your bags. So speaking of inspiration, I saw the influence that Marvel had on you. And as someone who owns over 150 old Marvel comic books,
oh wow,
I didn't really think to look like Power Man and Iron Fist, those older ones.
Yeah,
and I have to go now and like unpack some of them and look at the art in the background, right? And
the Master of Kung Fu was my favorite. It only lasted a few seasons. It wasn't. It was at the height of the Bruce Lee sort of time frame. And a local comic book place opened a few years ago, and I went in and bought like 5 issues. Some I even had. Well, I had before when I was younger. But it's a great series. It's sort of imagine like a James Bond karate guy. That's what it is. There's also so that's all tied into it. But it's very good, really good story.
Yeah, the influence of comic books, and as one of the students, I think it's a student who commented about the art. I love how you use your artwork based on the type of music genres you listen to. The jazz music really stuck out to me as well. And that's what puts you in your best space.
Sure. Yeah. I also sometimes use titles. There's a song as a DMX, Who We Be. I just named a painting that, and it's really inspired by hearing that. So I was actually in the middle of working on a painting and I heard the song. I go, he's saying exactly what I want to say in this painting. And so hopefully the viewers can make those connections. So that's all part of it. And sometimes I do, like I did a post this morning on my Instagram, and I took a while to sort of choose the music to go along with me showing my newest art book. So that's really important also. So music is a big part of my art.
Yeah, well, you can't go wrong with DMX. He saved hip hop in 1998.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have a weird question. It's not even weird. I think most people don't know, and it may not even be this be the situation. But do you insure your hands?
I don't know.
A lot of artists have took out like insurance policies on their hands, because that's where the gift is. So that's huge. So we have one of my last questions before we get to some of the other folks and their questions. As far as mental health, right, and mental health and how it really right now, you have art therapy right now that is really taken off, especially during the pandemic. Just a really creative way, and it really helps the brain put you in a nice space. What are some of the best spaces for you as an artist and other artists, younger artists that you've inspired? Where are the best spaces that you've either heard of, seen, or could even mention to some of the artists who are watching or who are on this call?
Best scene to be inspired?
The best to do your work.
Oh, well, I'll talk personally.
Yes.
Okay, which is really interesting because it's the same thing that inspired me when I was probably 10 years old, living in North Carolina. The weekends, especially back then, there was only 3 channels. And at some point, they started playing old movies. And so an old movie's on, and I got my drawing stuff around me, and I'm drawing and I'm listening, mostly listening to a movie on my working. So sometimes that's what happens to me in here. I put on Netflix or something like that. I find a movie that's sort of playing, and I can just sort of work endlessly with that sort of going. And I got my stuff around me, and I'm just still just sort of making art. That's part that and football. I'm a big football fan, so during the fall when the season's on, that's going. It's great to work to. It's this sort of zone I sort of get into. And what's interesting is the same. It just always reminds me of being a kid again. And except the materials have changed. And I sort of, I'm working on a project, but I just love that sort of quiet space. I can sit here for hours and just work while these things go. When I'm in that sort of zone. So that's my favorite zone to go into.
All of us who love our work could always honestly say that the work has like saved our lives, like working with students and kids. It saved, they do just as much for us as we do for them. So I'm gonna cue to Ms. Gill, who has a few questions for you as well.
Sure.
Awesome, that was fantastic. Thanks so much for that presentation. So we have a couple of questions from a staff member. Mm-hmm. First of all, you've named a lot of artists that you would go to a museum to see. Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite museum, and which one is it? And then the next question is, which is kind of separate. I'll let you answer that one first.
Museum, I do. The Met is probably one of my favorites because it's so diverse. Metropolitan Museum of Art is so large. And it's always something interesting to see. But I'm a fan of Whitney. I'm really just a fan of museums and galleries. I mean, Whitney's also a great museum for more contemporary work. The MoMA is also good. Those, but there's a small museum in South Carolina that it's funny. You sort of approach it with your sort of New York City sort of feel to South Carolina. What could be here? And that was like, whoa, like a great museum. And the High Museum in Georgia was also mind blowing. In Atlanta, exhibit there. So it's always So I just like museums.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, those are definitely some good ones.
Yeah.
The next question is, what advice would you share with our students if they're struggling with confidence in their ability and what to do within their art making, either technically or inspiration wise? What was your advice be?
This is probably the toughest thing about being an artist. It's not easy, and it's not easy to find support. Sometimes I taught for probably 15 years. I taught at Pratt Institute and I taught at Syracuse. And, I would tell students, so often your parents aren't even going to support you. If you're lucky enough to have a parent who supports what you're doing and feels good about it, then you're in a great place. But sometimes it's hard to find that. And friends, you have to somehow find your art community. You have to understand that it is time. And one of the reasons why I want to show you the different people I studied with, because it's not always about going to a program and graduating and then you're ready or you're done. Often there's continued study and even self-study. I didn't mention how many books I've read and how many museums, things I go to look at art, to learn about art. So you have to feel this sort of confidence that you can do it. Someone's going to do it. Right? 20, 30 years from now, someone's going to be exhibiting at a MoMA, and why not you? And you just have to trust yourself. You're making the right decisions. And it does take time. It's not always instant, but the person who continues to work at it usually gets better. That's the only thing I can say.
Yeah, continue to pursue that and practice, and one step after the other.
Yeah, a professor told me it was going to take me 20 years to understand how to paint the way I wanted to paint. And I was going to make him be a liar. I did everything I could to make him be wrong, but he was right. It took me about 20 years in order to really feel confident in what I'm doing. And then I actually wanted to push it someplace else once I got there. So it can take time, but you just have to be willing to put in the time. Um, it's a special lifestyle that's not meant for everyone. You have to, and it is a lifestyle, and it's not a 9 to 5. You don't punch in and punch out. It's a way of living, and if you enjoy this way of living, you will find other people in its community who will embrace you and support you. But I personally like this community. I like this lifestyle, so I wouldn't trade it for anything. But if someone doesn't, I completely understand. Also, my lights are not plugged in. It's getting dark out, and then my desk wasn't here a few minutes ago.
It doesn't look that's okay.
Right. Okay, guys.
Another question is, what would you suggest for a student to get good supplies for not a lot of money? As we know, art supplies can be super expensive.
Sure.
What would you recommend? Because you've kind of
Well,
ranged.
ordering online from any of the stores, Dick Blick and Jerry's Artorama, and you find these other places going to be the best places to go to get discount supplies. Unfortunately, you just have to use paint and materials in order to grow. At some point, the income and the price of your work should be able to support the supplies you need. I know it's hard in the beginning, but if you're creative, and I can name so many people who work with limited supplies and create something interesting. And that's what you have to do if you really have barriers for getting supplies. I think there was a guy named Tom Feelings who worked mostly black and white. And the reason why he worked that way is because he couldn't afford color materials when he was in college and in high school. And he built a career around working mostly in black and white. And then he found other ways to add color to it. So those are some of the creative things. And it's that old saying, they give you lemons, make lemonade. That's something I really believe in, and you really have to sort of do that. So there are people who've been in insane silence who've only used tea bags to make artwork with. So think outside the box, and if anything, if I had to go back and do it all over again, I would pay closer attention to the things around me, the neighborhoods I lived in, the people I talked to, my uncles, aunts, and all those people, the person next door. My advice I would give you is really try to observe your surroundings. Your artwork is right there around you. And often we go somewhere else, and we look I got to go to Spain to paint. No, you probably need to stay right there in your neighborhood and look at the person who's across the street from you and around the block from you. And that's probably where your most interesting artwork can come from.
Yeah, definitely. I believe that too. Yeah. To kind of tie into this, and then we have a couple more kids in the chat that have commented, asked questions. What's the most creative project that you've completed that you've made from kind of nothing, or recycled materials or something like that?
Well, I do a lot of collaging now, so a lot of that comes from sort of things that leftover things like that. So I'm a real believer in sort of recycling, reusing things. So I have drawers of paper that I purchased, and it's, of course, sometimes I made as well, which is always the most exciting thing. So I would be some of my collages, probably in my collage book that I have.
Fantastic. Let's see, we have a couple more in the chat here. Okay. What would be your favorite illustration you've done so far?
Oh God, it's really hard to say my favorite. I probably have my favorite books, which are Uncle Jed's Barbershop, The Bell Rang, and Satchel Paige are probably my favorite books that I've illustrated. It's hard to say which illustrations. I just there's so many. Some of them start off one way and in another way, and you really enjoy that. But it's hard to say which favorite illustration or painting I've done.
Can I try to filter that and say, based on all the illustrations, which one you feel was made up of a lot of your sort of like your pain, your burden, your deepest. It's just something that really that was either career or emotionally attached.
Well, that's probably gonna be a painting, and that's something you actually bring up a good subject to talk about, which I was supposed to talk about, but I forgot. The difference between illustration and difference between painting. The illustration is commissioned work, and so it starts with someone else. The painting, the studio artwork comes from myself. So I guess my favorite piece would be a piece called Who Should Own Black Art, which is the first piece you see on my website. And it's about this sort of Southern culture, and that has a lot of personality and personal things sort of in it. It's a question I've been asked often by my stepmother about, I can't afford to buy your paintings. Who can afford to buy your paintings, and why they're so expensive, and those types of things. So, that's probably the most personal and answers all those questions that you ask.
Thank you.
Sure.
Davina asked, when's your birthday? Davina is also a master cake maker, right, Davina?
September 25th.
You might be surprised. Maybe she'll make you a birthday.
We'll see.
We have another. How do you deal with art block when it occurs? What do you do? I know this happens to all of us.
You don't want to hear. I don't get art block.
Oh, okay.
It's hard to contain all the ideas I have, and I always see it as a challenge. I'm not sure how. I mean, I would have to sit down with you and sort of show you the books and show you just how the different things that I do. For example, this book I'm working on now about Toni Morrison, it's poetry, and she wrote poetically, and my approach is to approach it in a poetic way. So that just opens up so many doors for me to go into and have fun. There are times where I may, okay, I want to try something different. And that's where my block may come in, because I feel like I do a lot of pictures of people sitting at a table. Okay, so how could I do this again in a different way? So then I have a challenge. But that's one of the reasons why I look at a lot of artwork. I look at a lot of pictures and images, because I may see how someone else goes, oh, that's an interesting way. Maybe I should try something similar to that. Maybe I should try this, and that. So it's always, those are some of the things I sort of do when I'm just trying to find a new way to approach something that I approached before. And I really try to make my books different and not feel like you've seen it before. I want you to feel like it's something new and exciting. That's what I try to do.
Awesome. Thank you. Looks like Isha's put in the chat, as an artist who wants to start their own business in the future, what advice would you give to help with that?
Well, it's an art business, I'm assuming. Selling your own artwork is time consuming when you're actually creating the artwork. And so sometimes that's what galleries do come in to help take that burden off of you, so you have more time to create. So I'll be careful, first of all, balancing your time. Sometimes people who, the selling it's so much to do, and sometimes it's more productive to pass things off and give people a percentage, share a percentage, because it makes your life easier. So so I just be cautious of not trying to do too much.
I have another question. You talked about those beautiful murals that you made. Mm-hmm. One, this is a two-part question.
Okay.
This is it for me.
Right.
One, what's the longest you ever spent on a mural?
Okay.
And the second question is, how many pieces have you done at this or are actively doing at the same time?
Well, I usually work on one piece or one project at a time. This is probably the first time I'm sort of juggling like 3 projects in the way I'm juggling them.
Right, because I was wondering, you must be like.
Yeah. I have a friend who does multiple pieces at the same time, and I thought he was crazy, and he sort of shared some of his secrets with me and go, okay, so what you do is you sort of morning one, afternoon the one, and night the other. but I have to do a little disclaimer about the murals. Um, all the murals I've done have always been paintings I've done in my studio, and they've blown them up and they digitally put them in the spaces. So I'm not going to stay in Cincinnati, Ohio for 3 months and painting on a scaffold. So I couldn't do that. I don't have time to do that. So everything is painted here. I sent it to someone. Even the library in a town not too far from me, that I did that before. I didn't sit on ladders and paint that there. That was all done. I did it in my studio, and then someone digitally printed and put it up on the wall. Okay. So I hope that's not disappointing.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.
Painting on my back. Look. One or two more questions?
Any other students have any other questions, or staff members?
I just want to say thank you very much for coming and speaking. It was awesome to have you in my art community, and it was wonderful to have you speak to the students.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot. My pleasure. It's a pleasure meeting you and having you in the community.
I don't know if this is out for public, but you're going to be showing at Mass Mocha, right?
Yes,
July
yes.
2nd?
Yes.
I don't know if that is for everyone to go see.
We're trying to keep it open to the public. I believe they're trying to open to the public. Yeah.
So
yeah.
if
My
anyone
box is going to be there.
Yeah.
You're coming?
I'll be there. Yes.
Oh, good. What year are you in? What number are you now? You must be 4.
Graduating in June.
You graduated in June? Oh, wow. That went fast to me. Writing that thesis now, huh? Oh, God.
So for those who don't know, Miss Cataldo came and crossed paths with Ransome at the Leslie program for MFA.
Yeah.
In their programs.
Yeah.
Simultaneously. So
yeah.
So she helped make this connection, which we're so thankful for. So thanks, Ms. Cataldo, for that.
Thank you for joining us. I think that was a wonderful night and great presentation. And I'm sure the kids enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot. Anytime. One last question?
Looks like we have one last question. Heidi's entered here. What was the hardest decision you had to make during your career?
Oh, God. Leaving teaching was hard. I would say, the hardest decision. Well, I think maybe going to grad school was probably the hardest thing. That was a big one. That was probably the most difficult thing, was probably going to grad school, or maybe, and I left teaching in the middle of grad school. So that wasn't that hard, because I just had so much work. I just couldn't do it anymore. I was probably going to grad school was probably the most difficult thing. That's a good question. One I haven't talked about a lot, but probably a good one to end on. Unless there's something else.
Right. There's the last question of the night. What does the future hold for you?
Well, I feel so fortunate that I'm in this. All the kids are out of the house. My wife writes. I'm in here working. The weeks go so fast because we're both, so busy working on our projects. I don't know, just more wonderful projects. This thing with the History Channel is just amazing. To do these posters for a theater are just absolutely insane. I have my studio artwork. I have a large show that's going to be in Albany in 2 years, and they're doing a lot of programming around this exhibit. So that's amazing. So we'll see what happens after that exhibit in Albany, and that show may travel around the country to some other museums. So I'm really excited about that. So just a lot of good things are happening. I just hope they continue. I feel so blessed and so fortunate to have all these things. I really do. Especially, from where I came from, this little small town, and not, not a lot of opportunities for someone like myself who had this interest, and to be doing the things that I'm doing, I feel extremely fortunate.
We have a young artist here that just showed some of your art. Put that back up, kid.
Yeah, Davina, can you hold that up? She said she did a mandala based on the 12 zodiac signs. She has it here.
Am I not? Oh, I have to find her. I'm not seeing. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Fantastic, Davina.
Yeah, nice. That's really good drawing.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
You did that for a project or on your own? I like your.
It's basically for an art project. I have a Mr. DeMarzo.
Oh, wonderful. Good. Hope you get a good grade on it.
Yeah.
Looks good to me, but hey, I'm not.
We'd have to find DeMarzo if she doesn't. With that being said, Mr. Ransome, from everyone here at EHS community, we're honored and grateful to be in the presence of such a talented artist who smiled the entire time and clearly loves his job and is super passionate. And at the end of the day, when many of us get to work at 6 o'clock, it's great to end off our day in such a in the presence of such talent, and with our coworkers and with our audience and with obviously our students. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I'll let Ms. Gill close us out.
Yes, thank you, James, so much for being here tonight. We know you are so busy and doing so many amazing things. We appreciate you sharing your time with us tonight. It's inspiring to hear your journey from how you started to where you are now. We all start somewhere along that trajectory of a journey. So it's inspirational to hear that and how you've kind of like navigated that from geographical locations to, different locations within your artwork and your media. So thank you for sharing that. It's inspirational for our students to kind of see that progression. And we just appreciate you being here with us tonight. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And thank you for inviting me and planning this. We've started over a month ago working on this. So it's really a pleasure to do it. And hopefully you'll have me back sometime soon.
Absolutely. We'd love to. We'd love to hear, what kinds of plans you have going on. I'm sure there'll be many other projects from now to then.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for the staff and students for all the great questions. Thanks for being here tonight. You guys were awesome. Thank you guys.
Right,
have a good night, everybody.